Hey! Hi, it's Todd from Todd's Workshop and Todd Cutler here, and this is a sword breaker. Now exactly what it does, why it's called that, how it's used, it's all a bit of a mystery. You can use these teeth here on the back of the dagger to catch a sword blade if it gets between a little bit of a twist on it and the blade is caught. But how exactly do you achieve that? Now have a look at this clip here I made on a film a few years ago where I'm demonstrating the action of that catching. So Hob's coming in for a thrust. I've now been able to lock it between the tines of the blade and I've bound it. So now I've bound the blade and simply by pulling, there's nothing Hob can do about it. So I can twist it, I can pull it, I can even push it to an extent. So I've got complete control, or reasonably good control, over his blade. But as you can see, I really am no swordsman. So I gave it to Matt Easton from Schola Gladiatoria. Now he really is a swordsman. So we made another film and we tried to have a look at what insights we could find out about this weapon, how it was used and what it was used against. Have a look at this clip of him using it for the first time.
Oh!
Sword breaker. But when I gave this dagger to Matt, it was one of the weird weapon series of films that I do. And that's where I find something odd from history. And I surprised Matt with it. So he might have seen it, but he's never used it. So it'd be things like this big pole hammer here, or a folding flick spear, or a chain mace, or a flail. And he plays with it. We talk about it, we get insights, we have fun with it. But the thing is, it's not ever going to be a complete picture because he's unfamiliar with the weapon. So this film has taken a slightly different approach. A year and a half ago, I left this dagger with Matt's club. So they've been able to use it, to learn from it, to get the insights, to try and get a complete picture of what this is actually about. So I revisited Matt down at the club, down at Schola Gladiatoria, and Matt and Stephen, thanks very much, fenced with it. We talked about it, we got the insights. So thank you very much guys at the club for putting up with me, and unsurprisingly, a fight school is a noisy place. Hi, it's Todd from Todd's Workshop and Todd Cutler here, and I'm back with Matt Easton from Schola Gladiatoria in his very noisy fight school. But we are looking at this. It is a sword breaker. Some of you will know it, some of you won't. But this is late 16th century left-hand style dagger with obviously these very aggressive looking, but not actually, cutouts on the back face. These are commonly known as sword breakers. I'm guessing it's probably like a Victorianism, I'm thinking, where they like to classify everything. Does it break swords? No. Does it break the movement of swords, as in break as in a car? Well, maybe, but we're going to talk about that. So I gave this dagger to Matt and his club a year and a half ago, something like this.
Quite long now, yeah.
Yeah. For them to play with it, to use it, to get used to it, to understand it. And that is really what today is about now, that Matt has a much better grasp today of what this is all about than he did a year and a half ago. So, Matt, first thoughts?
So, a number of things. First of all, as you say, I don't think that we should be thinking about breaking blades with them, but they can certainly catch blades.
Yeah.
So I think if we were going to rename it, probably a blade catcher rather than a blade breaker would be.
I wholly agree with that.
Yeah. So that's the first thing. I think the second thing is that I have personal opinions about this. I think people always assume, they always think of rapiers in this period. And I personally think that actually these are particularly well suited to catching cuts. Now, not to say that rapiers don't cut, rapiers can cut, but they're predominantly thrusting, and that's the most dangerous attack with a rapier. But there were other swords around at this time, things like schiavona, basket-hilted broadswords, what we sometimes refer to as side swords, and they're cutting an awful lot, more than an average rapier does. And I actually think that these are particularly well adapted to catching cutting swords.
I must say, I fell into that trap of assuming because of the period, most likely, and it's used in the left hand, most likely it was going to be a rapier weapon.
Yeah.
Or accompaniment to a rapier. And, well, it appears, and we're about to find out through some practical tests and examples, that maybe I'm completely wrong. Probably completely wrong. So, I mean, what using this, what is your first insight? So what we'll do is we'll have an insight, we'll go for a quick routine,
Yeah.
talk about it, go for another insight, talk about it. So
Yeah.
your first insight about this weapon.
So first of all, don't become fixated on trying to grab and catch and control the opponent's blade. If you just use it like a left-hand dagger, then that will sometimes happen. But the most important thing to remember is you don't want to get thrust and you don't want to get cut. So if you just use it like a normal defensive left-hand dagger, that's the thing to concentrate on. If you fixate on just trying to catch the opponent's blade, then you're using too much of your brain energy on trying to do that, not thinking enough about running them through and defending yourself.
Because the headline feature of this is the teeth.
Yeah.
So your assumption has to be, that's what I'm doing.
Yeah.
But that's not the case.
No. So it's primarily a defensive dagger, and you must always just remember to defend yourself with your defensive dagger.
In which case, take it away. Can you give us an example of how you would use it defensively?
Yeah, sure. Let's have a look. All right.
Perfect time to stop. Thank you, Stephen. So, Matt, talk through the moves that you were doing there in the sense of keeping the dagger low, moving, what are you up to?
So fundamentally there, I'm just using it like I'd use any other left-hand dagger. So I'm putting my sword in the middle line, I'm having a left-hand dagger here, and I'm primarily dealing with attacks with my sword. If they get past my sword, then I'm taking it with the dagger and sometimes launching an attack with the sword at the same time as having defended with the dagger. So I can engineer it, but I wasn't deliberately going for any blade traction. But we can set up some techniques to have a look at how we can make that happen.
So you were using that just like any other left-hand dagger.
Yeah.
And obviously most left-hand daggers tend to be double-sided.
Yeah.
Right? This one obviously is single-sided and the cutting edge is on the outer face.
Yes.
Is that going to come in later in the discussion?
Yeah, so an interesting thing about these daggers is which side the ring is on dictates what the forward face is. So when I'm holding this dagger, my thumb is on the backside flat. So the teeth are facing to my right or my inside line relative to the dagger. So a lot of my defences there were actually with the smooth edge on the outside line. So in that sense, it's no different to a normal left-hand dagger. So to use those teeth, I actually have to be taking either his blade across this side, or if he comes down low, taking it down like that. Any normal defences normally defending that side are not going to come in contact with those teeth naturally.
So does that mean that you have to set yourself up deliberately to try and use them?
Yes, although what I would say is anything that encounters this side, whether it gets trapped or not, will have friction on those teeth. Now, one interesting thing is we could say, why didn't they put the teeth on the other side?
Yeah. Because when I made the first one I ever made, I just automatically went into autopilot and did it the other way round.
Yeah.
Looked at the picture afterwards and went,
Yeah, so there is an argument to be made against a rapier in the way that I was just using it. For me, it might make more sense to have the teeth on that side. But if we come back to the point about opposing cuts, if we are opposing a cut which predominantly comes from the outside line, I'm going to defend that like that.
Tell you what, Matt. Let's carry on with the rapier for a little bit,
Yeah.
and then we'll grab one of these guys' sabers or
Yeah.
something else that's a bit more representative of a cutting blade.
Yeah.
And we'll have a look at how it works
Yeah.
differently.
Cool. Right, so that was a really interesting moment there. So his blade came on this side and I pushed it down, and momentarily it did get grabbed by his blade. I didn't capitalise on it, but it did for a second grab his blade, and I wasn't trying to.
Yeah. Hey! Hey! Now that was unexpected.
So what was really interesting there was I wasn't trying to lock Stephen's blade, it just happened, and therefore I wasn't holding the dagger particularly strongly, and him having a stronger grip on his rapier to pull it straight out of my hand. And I think that's something which people forget, is that, you know, when you get any kind of lock or bind on, the other person's also got a lock and bind on you, and like I say, I wasn't expecting it, so it came straight out of my hand.
It didn't look cool, Matt. Just saying.
Well, it looked cool for Stephen.
It looked good, but not you. Sorry.
Should we have another go?
Yeah.
So with that one, I initially engaged here, and as Stephen pulled back, I managed to go around to there, at which point it locked in there.
Right.
Once you're grabbing, there's nothing I can do.
Yeah.
Okay.
So all that faces inside when it's point up. When you invert it, now pointing face down.
So another thing that was mentioned to me was, if I could take that,
Yep.
that of course when your opponent is fighting you, they're expecting to get a blow which moves in a certain way because it's on a hard steel edge.
Yep.
And because it changes their expectation, they're not used to it, the timing goes to pot and they're gone.
So I have to be honest, I don't find that a huge amount. So you have this added friction as it comes down here, which is like any serrated blade. It doesn't slide up and down as you would normally expect. However, against thrust, I've got my own blade lock, against thrust, often the two blades are so shallow against each other that that's actually minimal. As I say, I think if Stephen gives a cut number 1 here, just as a parrying device, I find that far more marked and noticeable against the cut than against the thrust.
Okay, would you conclude that that is a weapon to be used alongside, or a weapon to be used against fighting other rapiers primarily?
I think it can do anything that another dagger can do. So I don't think it's bad against rapiers. I just think that all of those effort with the teeth don't make as much of a difference against a rapier as you think they might.
Yeah.
So they are useful, but in a standard rapier fight, it doesn't happen as often as you would think it would. And for us we can make it happen, we can engineer it to happen, But when we're just fencing and trying to hit each other, it doesn't happen very often. And part of the reason for that is because the blades are often at quite a shallow angle. When they're at more of a right angle, then it's more likely to go into the notch, and that happens against cuts more than
So it's a lot of fuss, a lot of complexity, a lot of, to be honest, weakness, because you often see these things broken. But can I just ask you on that basis to look at some of the broad-bladed swords that would be around at the time that were not rapiers? So, Stephen, would you be able to grab a sabre or a something?
Side sword?
So I've got an arm sword. Or
Yeah. I've got a side sword, I think I can lend you. Yeah.
That'd be fine.
Yeah.
Nice. So again, twice in that bout, you managed to capture Stephen's sword.
And for me,
noticed that happen until I couldn't move it back.
Oh, really?
and for me, it was partly because he was cutting. His point was coming up to cut, which meant that he gave me enough blade to plough my edge into. Whereas if someone's got the point online all the time, I find it harder to do that. You know, if he did a big cut at the top of my head, you can double up the two weapons as well for a strong parry, but that also leaves that still bound. So much like with sword and buckler, if you come here, you now command with that while responding with your cut from there. So to me, you can use it quite like a sword and buckler, but it has the advantage that it binds in a way a buckler doesn't.
Yeah.
So, but I have to add as well that someone who's more adept at rapier and dagger might get a much higher success rate against rapiers with this. But I just think we don't see them in treatises. We don't see them in the rapier manuals.
Do we not see them in any treaties anywhere?
As far as I'm aware, no.
And you probably would be.
Well, I haven't studied that many rapier treatises, but I don't ever remember seeing them in a rapier treatise. And so there are some surviving in museums, but proportionately to normal left-hand daggers, they don't seem to have been popular
No,
at all.
left-hand daggers are everywhere.
Yeah.
So I think that, we may as well wrap it up in that sense. So I suppose putting words in your mouth, or at least my thinking, is it's probably survivor bias. We see them around because they are so, and what we mean by survivor bias is they're survived because they're so weird and wonderful.
Yeah.
People want to hang them on the wall, they want to put them in museums. So there's relatively a lot of them out there. But actually the number that were ever made and used, if they never made it into a fencing bit, was probably pretty slim.
Yeah.
So they were around, they exist, they're not fantasy, but they probably were pretty rare.
Yeah, and I think another thing that's worth mentioning about them is they are really poorly designed for penetration. Daggers are, especially if you come close, if you give me cut number 2, if we've come here and the swords are occupied, your dagger becomes the principal weapon. And actually stabbing through a 17th century doublet, 16th, 17th century doublet, that is not a great point shape for that at all. Not as good as the swords and not as good as a normal left-hand dagger. So it might be great for parrying, but to me it's at the cost of its offensive capacity.
So to sum it up, they're very complicated. They are potentially weak because you see them broken.
Yeah.
They're going to be expensive. They were probably very rare even at the day, and the fencing masters didn't consider them enough to even bother writing up about it. So on the balance of things, and not offensively particularly great. So on the balance of things, a little bit of a waste of time for showmen.
I think possibly, and I'm not saying that they don't have some advantages. I just personally think that they don't deliver as much as they seem to promise when you look at them.
Yeah,
when
because
you
they promise a lot.
Yeah, and if you like, you know, as we saw at the beginning, if you just pick one of these up and fence rapier and dagger, it's like holding any other dagger. It actually very rarely happens that it gets locked in the blade, doesn't it? So you really have to. You can make it happen, but then when you're trying to make that happen, you're potentially making yourself more vulnerable to other things like getting run through the body.
So you lock their blade, but the action of that locks your blade as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So I mean, when our weapons are joined, okay, I've incapacitated his primary weapon, but my secondary weapon, he's still now got a dagger. If he charges in, and if he gets in close in quickly, at that range, the dagger is a better weapon than the sword. So.
Because you basically can't reach him.
No, and I've got to try and defend. So we kind of cancel out. So it's a bit like grabbing a sword blade. It can be advantageous if done at the right time and immediately capitalised on. So really, what I need to do if I do get a bind on his blade in any way is immediately deliver that home thrust before he's able to charge me down. So just because you get this lock on doesn't mean you've won the fight, not by a long margin. It just means for that instant, you've got an advantage.
So it gives you an instantaneous advantage while he's working out what's going on.
And you can lose that advantage in the blink of an eye. Yeah.
And if it were to be used against rapiers or flat-bladed swords,
I personally
better.
think that is an anti-broadsword, anti-side sword, skivona, that type of, cutting thrust sword, more of a cutting sword. I personally think that's, and also, like you say, we see them broken. I don't think these would get broken against rapier blades, but they might get broken against a broadsword blade. So, but they might have been popular on battlefields. They might not have been popular in dueling, and that's another thing we have to consider. These could have actually been a gunner's, companion weapon to their cut and thrust side sword, or broadsword. So.
Or somebody with too much money and wants to look flash.
Yes.
Who knows?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Matt. Some lovely insights again.
Thank you.
That's it, really. So, Stephen, thank you very much. See you again.